Hey everyone, Harris Peskin here, joined with founder of NY Isles Nation, Pete. Pete is kind enough to join us for the second week in a row. Not too much in the last week. Since we talked last week, I think we talked combine. We were talking everything to do with Hagen, Schaefer, Misa, the whole kit and caboodle. But this week we're talking a couple of other things, 5 topics. Been a bit that's happened in the last week, not too much, but Ryan Bowness, I believe it was yesterday, signed to the assistant general manager position by Matt Darche, as well as Buchner and Bennett as the assistant coaches. And then down the list, touch on everything real quick that we're going to be talking about. JG Pageau linked to Boston on the rumor mill, and I believe it was Pierre Engvall was also potentially something that Dave Pagnotta was reporting that we're trying to find some flexibility on. So quite a lot that's gone on in only a week's time, and we are only, I think, 11 days out from the NHL draft. I imagine there's going to be quite a lot of stuff that happens between then, a lot more rumors given kind of our place in the draft. But Pete, why don't we start off with Ryan Bowness? What are your initial thoughts here on Bowness?
It's interesting because on paper his resume doesn't look that great.
Yeah.
But the more you look into it, it seems like he's been prognosticated as a future general manager for a while.
Yeah.
Former Islander Steve Stais took over the Senators operation last fall, and it seems like he let Bonus go more as in he was looking to hire his own guy rather than an indictment on Bonus's performance. Prior to Ottawa, Bonus worked with the Winnipeg Jets from 2011 to 2017.
Yeah.
While he was there, they drafted players such as Mark Scheifele, Adam Lowry, Jacob Trouba, Connor Hellebuck. Let's see who else? Josh Morrissey, Nikolai Ehlers, Mason Appleton, Kyle Connor, Jack Roslovic, Patrick Laine, Logan Stanley. So he had quite an impressive performance in Winnipeg. He then moved on to Pittsburgh, where he struggled. You honestly look at their draft classes from when he took over, and there's not really an NHL player in that whole list. The one that's played the most NHL games is Kalen Addison with 152 games. And you could say that they didn't have a lot of draft picks because they were trading picks to compete. But also the fact that they couldn't find a couple of NHL players in those drafts is probably a reason why they've fallen off so much in recent years.
It's interesting. Well, let's just talk a little bit about his time with Pittsburgh, because I think that's really when he kind of, I want to say, jettisoned into a little bit more of a primary role. I mean, there's a lot of professional scouts that occupy the roles on these teams, but as you can see on my screen, in 2019, 2020, he was promoted to the director of professional scouting, and I have to imagine that's kind of when he takes on a little bit more of an enhanced role as the director of professional scouting. And if you look at their signings, there being Pittsburgh from 2019 on, it's not amazing, but Pittsburgh is a unique team because, as you say, he was obviously a pro scout from 2016. I'm sure that this obviously the drafting has been bad in Pittsburgh for quite some time. I think maybe even Gensel was the last time they hit on anything, which was almost a decade ago. But you look at 2019 on, he's really playing the role of director of professional scouting. So I think his role is probably a little bit more, who am I targeting in the free agency class? Who is a person that I should be looking at? And so I look at kind of his free agency signings. I'm just going to throw out some names here. And I think that, well, I'll throw out some names and I'll tell you what my theory is, right? He's signing Brandon Tanev to in 2019 to a $3.5 million 6-year contract. Now, Brandon Tanev is, you know what you're going to get with Tanev, right? He's not amazing. He's a third line, fourth line player, but that's a player that was a high impact player for them in that 2019 series with us. I mean, I remember he had a goal. What was it? Actually, I guess it was 2021. He had a goal in Game 3, I think, against us at the Coliseum, which was a pretty impactful goal that caused us to lose that game. But Tanev, then a guy like, and I think this is probably his best under-the-radar signing, Marcus Pettersson, is a guy who is probably a top 4 defenseman, drafted by the Ducks in 2014. This guy gets signed in 2019 he gets re-signed in 2019 by the Pittsburgh Penguins to a cap hit of $874,000 on a one-year deal. And I have to think that that is the exact kind of deal that a general manager who is the director of professional scouting is looking to give out, because it's an under-the-radar deal. It's kind of like what a Garth Snow used to do. If you remember Ryan Jankowski and Garth Snow, like those guys that were running. I mean, Jankowski ran the draft, but Snow was signing these kind of under-the-radar players. He's picking up a guy like Thomas Hickey off waivers. He's signing a Matt Molson, a Brad Boys, a P.A. Parento. Those guys who are off the kind of garbage bin, so to speak, but could play at play at an NHL level. And I'll just go to Marcus Pettersson's stats here. I mean, the guy currently is a second pairing D-man for the Vancouver Canucks. He's since left Pittsburgh, but he's putting up pretty good numbers in Pittsburgh. He's putting up 30 points, 20 points. He's playing the second pair minutes. That's not a bad signing. And then you kind of go down the list a little bit. Stefan Noesen, another guy signed by him. John Marino, and I have to be honest with you, of all the people that he signed in this time frame, John Marino is probably the one that excites me the most. He signed him for $4.4 million in a 6-year deal in 2021. Don't get me wrong, that's an expensive deal. And it was coming off of a couple of years of meh play, kind of, so to speak, right? He had kind of had he had played a very little. I don't think he had played anything professionally prior to 2019, but he was really given a chance in 2019, and then he was signed to a pretty long-term but friendly cap-wise deal. The guy's playing second pair minutes, $4.4 million. That's not horrible. And since that time, he's developed and he's remained a second pair D-man with New Jersey, with Utah, putting up positive expected goal values every single year, playing second pair minutes with Utah now. So, I go down the list: Marcus Pettersson, John Marino, Stefan Noesen, and then one other guy that really sticks out to me, Evan Rodriguez. This is a guy that is playing in the second back-to-back finals right now. He's a third-pair guy playing on a line with Brad Marchand. Small guy, 5'9", but really given an opportunity to succeed in Pittsburgh in 2019-2020. And I think he did a great job. I mean, he goes on to put up 43 points, and that's kind of the role that he's played since. So, what do you make of Marcus Pettersson, Stefan Noesen, John Marino, Evan Rodriguez? What do you make of those, in that context? What do you make of that?
It's funny because the last time I really watched college hockey was when Jack Eichel was still in school.
Yeah.
And I remember watching a bunch of BU games and thinking, this Evan Rodriguez kid's really good because he was Eichel's line mate at BU. So I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but me and Ryan Jankowski are on the same page with him. The thing that I'm kind of intrigued with is the fact that Islanders Twitter is freaking out a bit that the Islanders haven't Scott Pellegrino yet, lose 2 assistant GMs.
I would say you cut out a little bit. So you're saying Chris Lamoriello, you're a little bit upset about, or Isles Nation's freaking out that Chris Lamoriello hasn't been cut yet.
Yeah, Lamoriello and Pellegrino lose other assistant that he's had for 40 years. I would just say pump the brakes there. I don't know if you remember when Lou first took over the Islanders. He left Garth in charge for a while, got all the value he could have out of Garth. I think he actually ran the draft where we drafted Dobson and Wallstrom.
He did, yeah.
And then kind of kept Garth around through free agency, used his intel. And once he had no use for him anymore, he just kind of – I think Garth got assigned to some minor role in the organization for a couple of months, and then he faded into oblivion. I don't think we're going to see an announcement that Lamoriello or Pellegrino was fired. I think they'll get a similar kind of sail off into the distance type of parting ways with.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely correct. And honestly, it's interesting. What role does a guy like a Ryan Bowness have to play in this organization? He could very well take up the same role that he was playing in Pittsburgh, where it's more of we're looking for professionals. We're looking for you to find the garbage guys that we have the ability to sign. And remember, we talked about this last time. The Islanders don't have a ton of cap room right now after they're going to go ahead and sign their restricted free agents. So they'll need to be identifying players like Evan Rodriguez, who you aptly discussed with respect to Jack Eichel in college, right? Like they'll need to find those kinds of players. So that might be a role. But then obviously, as you correctly indicate, Bridgeport has been a tire fire for 2 decades at this point. historically inept last year. The record, we've gone over this. 4 wins at home. Ineptitude is putting it lightly. Do you think that there's a potential that maybe Chris Lamoriello, though he was given a parachute on his way out, finds himself being replaced by a guy like Ryan Bowness in Bridgeport?
I sure hope that Chris Lamoriello does get replaced.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if it'll be Bowness himself. It seems like he has the director of player personnel title here.
Yeah.
And in Ottawa, he was in charge of Belleville for 2 years, and then he was promoted to the director of the associate GM of Ottawa, director of player personnel. I'm not sure how much of an impact he had on Belleville his last year there. But, I mean, Belleville in the 3 years where
he was there.
They went 31-31, 38-28, 34-27. They made the playoffs 1 out of 3 years. They lost in the first round.
Yeah. To be honest with you, I would probably take that at this point because it's a massive upgrade over Chris Lamoriello. But the hint of irony, of course, is that Chris Lamoriello is it's nepotism coming from Lou Lamoriello, but ironically, Rick Bowness was an Islanders coach in the mid-'90s, and his son Ryan is the one that's the guy that we're hiring now. I mean, I guess it's a bit different in the sense that Ryan is kind of being promoted to a position above what Rick would theoretically be, because Rick is a coach and he's kind of like positioning himself as a future GM. But nonetheless, we really can't seem to get away from this nepotism. But interesting nonetheless. And I do think it's correct to point out kind of there has been a real success in Ottawa, at least in developing prospects, in making the team a good contending team now. They lost this year to the Toronto Maple Leafs in the first round of the playoffs, but they've had a big turnaround, and you have to give some sort of credit to the front office there. Claude Giroux, Josh Norris, Travis. Oh, I don't want to say Travis Hamonic because he's been mad, but Eric Brandstrom, Tarasenko, he's no longer with the team, but David Perron was a big part of the team. These are all signings that took place while Ryan Bowness was with the team. So you look at a guy like an Eric Brandstrom, obviously no longer with the team either, but no longer with the team either, but he stepped up in a big way while he was signed there, and he kind of came out of nowhere a little bit under Bowness's, I guess, reign there. And really, I think David Perron this year, not as much of an impact in the regular season, but in the playoffs, he was getting big minutes. I don't know if you watched that series with the Toronto Maple Leafs, but he was being put on the power play. They had him running all kinds of big minutes against the team's top line, against the Maple Leafs top line. I mean, this is a guy with a tremendous amount of vet experience and really called on to do an important job by the Ottawa Senators. So I think that if you're going to, I think it's first of all correct to say that Ottawa was a better team, a team improved over the past couple of years where they were kind of the laughingstock. And I do think you kind of have to look at Bowness as being responsible for at least some of that.
I agree. And I thought this was the case, but I just looked it up. I wanted to make note that the last time Bridgeport team won a play, any guesses who the head coach was?
Well, you cut out a little bit, but I think what you said is the last time Bridgeport made the playoffs, guess who the head coach was? So
won a playoff round. Won a playoff round.
Huh. Is it Jack Capuano?
Nope. It was Steve Sterling.
Oh, wow. So that's okay. So let me date myself. Steve Sterling was the coach.
Leading scorers were Trent Hunter,
okay,
Eric Manlow, and Justin Mappletoft.
So that would have had to have been 2001, 2002.
It was 02-03. They were led by Rick DiPietro, who was called up midway through the season when Osgood was traded.
How does that make any sense, though? Because Trent Hunter was on the 102 team in the playoffs. He got called up, and maybe he went to Bridgeport again the next year because he was number 43 in that playoff run, and he actually looked pretty good if you remember the series against the Toronto Maple Leafs. But
there are some names on this roster, man.
Go for Trent Hunter. I'm curious. Let me hear it.
Trent Hunter, Justin Mappletoft, Rafi Torres, Alan Letang, Matthias Weinhandel, Sven Butenschon, Tommy Pettinen, Justin Papineau, Eric Goddard, Radek Martinek, Rick DiPietro, Steve Valiquette. Pretty good.
It's really funny because you kind of look at this and you're like looking at this roster and you're just like, this is the greatest hits of Islanders that like never went anywhere. Like Justin Papineau was one of the most hyped prospects. Matthias Weinhandel, I think we got Weinhandel in the Yashin trade, right? One of the most hyped prospects we've ever had at the time, I think, and it just goes nowhere. Like it was Justin Mappletoft, Justin Papineau, Matthias Weinhandel, and then I think it was in 2003 or so we draft Robert Nilsson instead of Zach Parise, and it just goes nowhere. I mean, like it goes nowhere super quick. So yeah, I mean,
I don't know where Terry Nokalainen was during all this.
yeah, right. Oh man, Sven Budenschut.
But
That's another. But there's one player. I guess you could call Trent Hunter a future NHL, a future NHLer. Right? Trent Hunter actually did turn into a pretty serviceable NHLer for like 5 years, but Radek Martinek was, I think, one of the most successful players on this roster, if not the most successful player on this roster. He definitely has to be, right? Like in terms of games played, I don't have the numbers in front of me what I'm looking at right now on the screen, but let's see right here.
I would say Hunter, Torres, Martinek, and DiPietro are the 4 NHLers from that team.
I would bet that Martinek played more than DiPietro.
I'm sure he did. That's not saying much.
Did he play more? The question I think is, did he play more than Trent Hunter? Let's take a look. It's actually super interesting. I'm curious. NHL games. He ended up playing. Let's see. It doesn't even actually have the number here. I would have to sum it all up, but I don't feel like doing that. But he played 1, 2, 3. Oh yeah, there's no way he didn't. He played like over a decade in the NHL.
Trent Hunter 497, Radek Martinek 486.
Really?
Just edged him out.
That's super surprising. Wow. Okay. Well, look at me. All right. Well, look, this is it's trip down memory lane. Memory lane. That's always fun. Let's move on here. Quick hits. So, JG Pageau, linked to a Boston trade. Talk to me. What do you think about JG Pageau potentially going to the Boston Bruins?
It does make sense there. You consider the fact that in recent years, they've lost Patrice Bergeron. They've lost David Krejci. They traded Charlie Coyle. And their only real replacement was the Lindholm signing. So they're weak down the middle. Obviously, we don't know what direction they're going in now with Marchand gone, Bergeron retired. Yep. But, I mean, if they want to try and run it back and compete, Pageau on a 1-year deal gives them a guy that could play some second, third line minutes.
But I'll be honest, I don't look at that Boston Bruins roster and see a team that's even close to competition. And they're going to go take a $5 million contract from JG Pageau. Does that make any sense?
It would make more sense for a team out west like Anaheim or San Jose that needs a good veteran that plays the right way to teach their young guys how to be professional, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I don't necessarily disagree. I'm just looking at this Boston Bruins roster right now. I'm seeing Pavel Zacha, Elias Lindholm, Casey Middlestat down the middle. Is Casey Middlestat signed for next year? I would have to take a look at that. But I don't honestly see, first of all, I don't see a team that's competing. This is not a playoff caliber team. This is a team that needs to tear it down. Maybe they're looking to do a quick retool, kind of like what Washington did, because you don't want to waste the prime years of David Pastrnak. But this is not a team that is, as presently constituted, is anywhere even close to a cup. Like, they're not even close. And JG Pageau.
I never thought they were as good as they were on paper, even in the years where they were winning the President's Trophy.
You think so?
It didn't make sense.
I mean, they had Patrice Bergeron those years, right? Like they had Patrice Bergeron.
But they had one good line. They had one good line, and then
yeah. I think they had 2 good lines, right? Because they had on the top line Bergeron, Pastrnak, Marchand, and then they would go down the middle, and you had guys like David Krejci, who's still putting up close to a point a game. So I don't know. I think that it's interesting because you're right that Boston routinely overperformed, but that hasn't been the case really in 2 or 3 years, and I don't think that JG Pageau is a good fit. Now you mentioned there could be other teams out there. I think what's more interesting is that we're listening. David Pagnotta is reporting today that we're listening on JG Pageau, and I find that interesting because this is a guy that is a character guy in the room. This is a guy that has been really a staple of this Islanders team for 6 years at this point. I want to say we got him 5 years, I guess. We got him going into COVID, and big part of that bubble team guys. winning the ping pong tournament championships or some shit like that, right? And he's kind of been through it with his team, so it would be a big loss. We also acquired him for a first round. We also traded a first round pick for him in 2020, but I don't know that he's. I guess the question is, do you see a use for him on a going forward basis on Long Island? What is he going to do?
He's kind of an embodiment of the franchise as a whole, where ever since that 2021 playoff run, it hasn't been bad, but it's been noticeably worse, and it continues to slowly get worse. But on paper, it's not bad, but if you watch him day to day, you can tell it's getting worse. He suffered that wrist injury against Tampa.
Yeah.
And then the next year after that, he couldn't shoot the puck. And now, you could tell his skills are diminished. He's still a high-energy player, kills penalties, wins faceoffs. Somehow put up 40-something points last year, but you could tell he's a declining player. But it's the type of player that, teams like to have. He's a winning player.
Yeah, it's funny because that's just in there. And I get it, right? Listen, the Islanders were a much improved team when they went ahead and got JG Pageau in the middle of his 20-something goal season in 2019, 2020. He definitely was a positive addition to that team. But if you look at the numbers that he's had since, I'm not seeing, I'm seeing a guy who is not typically playing with the puck. He's playing without the puck. Though to his credit, if you look this year at the numbers, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but if you look this year at the numbers, prior to the trade of Brock Nelson when he was playing third line minutes, his possession numbers were actually pretty decent. They ended up declining after we went ahead and traded Nelson because he was kind of pushed up in the lineup. So I'm not sure you could blame him for what he ended up with because his numbers were pretty good in his proper third line center role. So I think that's what that's what he is. He's a third line center. He could kill penalties, although to be honest with the Islanders, he didn't do a very good job this year. But he's a third line center. He could put up 40 points, maybe, probably closer to 35 points. Maybe there's room for him on a team that needs that kind of player. I don't know that there's room for him at $5 million on a team that needs that kind of player. I think what's likely to happen is the Islanders would retain some of that salary. And I don't think that we're getting anything higher than a fourth round pick. If I were to guess on what the kind of trade would be, I'd say third or fourth round pick with the Islanders retaining half salary. That's kind of best case scenario for me.
I think they can get. I don't think they would have to retain salary. Look at what Chris Kreider just got coming off a dreadful season where
he's a 50-goal scorer,
He's also getting older and is coming off a season where he had 30 points, making $7 million a year.
Yeah, but the Rangers were a complete fire.
With term.
Yeah, that's true.
We're a tire fire, but he also has term on his contract. He hasn't one and done.
Yeah.
So he's still a contributing player. You look at his numbers with the Islanders. He had 28 and 54 games. Quick math tells me that's around a 45-point pace, maybe closer to 50. 39 and 77, 40 and 70, that's 45 points.
Yeah. And
then 2 years ago, 33 and 82, that's just a terrible year. And then 42 and 79. So you say closer to 35, I could argue closer to 45.
I think it depends on what year you want to use, right? I think this year was obviously a good year. I think the 2023-2024 season was also. I'm using that kind of as my benchmark. But you're right. He could be closer to 45. So it's probably let's call it even. Let's call it 40 points. The point is, I think.
You also have to remember all these years he's having line mates like Tom Kunak and Leo Komarov for the most part. Third line's been kind of a black hole.
I think it's been, at least in the past 2 years, it's been Holmstrom. I think mostly if I had to bet, I'd probably say that Holmstrom is probably his most common winger, at least. And I think he played a little bit of time with Siplikov this year too. But I'm not sure that those are, to your point, I'm not sure that those are fantastic wingers. Let's move on from JG Pageau. Let's talk Pierre Engvall. Pierre Engvall signed to a 7-year contract. What was it, 2 years ago at this point?
5 years to go, baby.
5 years to go. What do you make of Pierre Engvall potentially? We're trying to shed his salary.
I kind of tie this one into something I think we're going to talk about in a bit. The Islanders have been linked to KHL free agent Maxim Shabanov, who put up 23 goals, 67 points in 65 games with Chelyabinsk Tractor of the KHL this year.
That's pretty good pronunciation there.
I'm Polish, so.
Well, I mean, at least you're on the border, depending on where. Kaliningrad.
24 years old. 24 years old. He's 5'8", 156.
Yeah.
If they're going to bring in a player like this, and the hope is that they add some talent in free agency up front, there are too many bodies on this team. You got to ship some of them out. Yeah. Engvall's one of those guys. Siplikov, who knows if he's going to get a contract. I mean, if someone wants Engvall, please take him.
Yeah,
you talked about maybe getting negative assets for Pageau. Engvall is someone I would trade for a negative asset.
I totally agree. I think that you look at Pierre Engvall. He's on year 3 of a 7-year deal. Cap hit $3 million. He is he's signed till 29-30. There really is. There's very little. I think when we went ahead and got him for a 3rd-round pick in 2022, 2023, there was this concept like, okay, we take a flyer on this guy. He's put up 12 goals already. Maybe there's potential there, but if anything, I think what we've seen over and I think you'll remember too in that season there was him, Palmieri, and Nelson made up a very successful second line. But ever since Patrick Waugh has got here, I just feel like he's just been in the doghouse on a yearly basis. Like he just has not done anything with Patrick Waugh, and there were times when Waugh's going to give it to you, right? Like he really gave it to.
He sent it to Bridgeport to start the year.
Yeah, I know. Well, he gave, what is his name? He gave it to Anthony DeClaire, but Engvall hasn't shown anything, and I'm not sure that there's room for him, as you say, on a going forward basis. So what is the best case scenario for getting rid of Engvall?
I mean, you look at the Islanders made the decision when they hired Matthew Darche. He and the organization made the decision to bring back Patrick Waugh. How many players that he knowingly dislikes are you going to give him? He doesn't like Duclair. He doesn't like Engvall. I'm sure there's more out there I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But it's 2 wingers.
He doesn't like half the roster.
Pretty much. I mean, Siplikov was getting scrapped, health bomb down the stretch last year. I mean, he had 8 goals and 15 points in 62 games last year.
Yeah.
This guy, you could argue that maybe when we traded for him, there was untapped potential because he was putting up 10, 15 goals in like a bottom 6 role in Toronto. But at this point, there's no untapped potential there.
No.
He has the tools, and he's a frustrating player. We were talking about early 2000s Islanders before. You know who this guy reminds me of? Oleg Kvasha.
Oleg Kvasha. Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a little while.
I heard you about to say Brad Isbister. That's another good one.
Brad Isbister, you said?
Yeah.
I like. Well, it's interesting because Brad Isbister played with a little bit more of he played with a little bit more grit, and I actually do think he had some success. Didn't he put up 30 goals one season, or maybe it was a 25 goal season? I can't remember. What was it?
Right.
What was it? He was in Edmonton after. He was in Edmonton after he went to was with the Islanders. Anyway, moving on. Pierre Engvall. I think best case scenario, at least the way I see it, is the Islanders might actually have to give up a pick here to get rid of him. Do you think that the Islanders would have to give up a pick, kind of similar to the Andrew Ladd situation that when he went to the Coyotes? I mean, we're not going to give up a 2nd-round pick like we did with Andrew Ladd. And by the way, that was the 2nd-round pick we got for Devon Toews. One of the worst trades, if not the worst trade in Islanders. Well, no. Is it the worst trade in Islanders? I think I can't say Chara is because it's Yashin. We got Yashin. He's still an all-star. But it's probably up there as one of the worst trades. And Devon Toews, perennial, this guy's going to be the starting pair on Team Canada next year. That has to be one of the worst trades of all time. Anyway, what do you think we're giving up to get rid of Pierre Engvall? Is it a 2nd-round pick? Is it a 3rd-round pick? What is it?
So, see, what you have to do here is you have to analyze what a buyout would be. And if the Islanders bought out Engvall right now, his cap hit would be $1 million a year until 2035.
Mm-hmm.
So I will be 46 years old. Jesus Christ, that's scary. Anyway, So you would eat $1 million of cap hit for the next 11 years, 10 years. Is that worth it rather than trading a pick?
Yeah, I'm not.
That's a question. I don't know.
I think you could probably then, with those numbers in mind, maybe it's a late round pick. I mean, also you're betting that no one really wants him. I mean, that's at least the assumption I have. Looking through,
you also have to consider that with the way the cap's going up right now, in 3 or 4 years, $1 million might be half the minimum salary.
Right. Yeah, that's true. So it might actually be a strong contract is kind of what you're saying. Hey, look, that was the DPHO rationale at the time, at least, right?
Well, the amnesty, they got the amnesty DPHO, but I think he still has 4 more.
No, what I mean is like when we signed him in 2006 for 15 years, we're like, oh, we're gonna get him for the cap's gonna go up, and we're gonna get him for $4 million something a year, and at the end of the day, it'll be worth it. And I guess
trust me. Rick DiPietro's contract never, ever prevented this team from competing.
Yeah, I hear you. But what's interesting that you brought up, though, is, so, I mean, we'll call it 5th, 6th round. I think that we could potentially be rid of Engvall, and I think that would probably be for the best because it'll open up a wing slot. And there's plenty we could do with that wing slot, and we're about to talk into what I think is probably the most interesting topic of the day, and that's Shabanov. Maxim Shabanov. Let's talk about him. I'll show some highlights on the screen while we're talking about him here. What do you make of this guy?
I will not lie to you. I've never seen this guy play outside of the YouTube highlights that you're watching right now.
Yeah.
I think the natural inclination is to compare him to Maxim Sipakov, who we got at this very point last year. Sipakov was 25 when we signed him. Shabanov is 24. The size is a big difference. Shabanov is a small guy. He's 5'8", 156.
Yeah.
Sipakov is 6'3", 210.
Yeah.
In terms of production in his last year in Russia, Sipakov scored 31 goals and 47 points. And Shabanov had 23 goals, 67 points. So Sipakov's a bit better of a goal scorer, but Shabanov's a much better playmaker.
Yeah.
Neither were drafted in the NHL for what that's worth. I mean, if you could add a guy for free, he's not going to cost you an asset.
Yeah.
Bring him into camp, give him a chance to make the team. I mean, Sipakov for
what you just put on that goalie right there. Sorry, go ahead.
I don't think you get too mad about the Sipakov signing. Like, in hindsight, it might not have worked out as well as we had hoped, but it wasn't like a terrible move. He had 10 goals, 35 points in 77 games.
Yeah.
I mean, you got him for free. So if Shabanov wants to come over, compete for a spot in training camp, I'm sure he's going to want some kind of certainty that he's going to make the team.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I think that there's a distinction, right? Like there was a time when I would say this guy, like think about like 2016, 2017, 2018, you had a guy like Jan Kovar. Do you remember Jan Kovar?
Yes, I remember Jan Kovar.
Right, Jan Kovar. Like, this is a guy we're bringing over from the KHL, and he's blocking guys like Bavillier from getting ice time, or, I don't think he's necessarily blocking Barzal, but another one was, remember we signed Pierre-Marc Bouchard, right? Another guy that just, I think we're blocking Barzal from coming up, and it's that kind of guy that you're like...
You're forgetting the all-time best one.
Who's
Lucas Pisa blocking Devon Taves.
Right, Lucas Pisa, right. Jesus.
But Dennis Seidenberg, too.
Right. But, like, I don't necessarily think that that's the case right now with this team, right? I think we're kind of in this plug-and-play mode at the moment where really you don't...
There's nothing in Bridgeport. There's nothing there.
Right, there's nothing there. So who are you even blocking? Cole Iserman? I mean, is that who we're talking about? Cole Iserman at this point? He's the only winger that would even be potentially blocked by adding a guy like Shabanov. So I don't know that necessarily, and I don't think there's any chance in hell that he's going to play this year with the Islanders. And frankly, he didn't even have that good of a season last year. I mean, it was fine. He had a ton of goals, didn't have a lot of assists, but he's putting up less than a point a game. And by the way, that less than a point a game that Cole Iserman was putting up is getting the vitriol that's being thrown at James Hagan's online right now because he can't put up a point a game. Cole Iserman's doing far worse in terms of his point production, and he's 2 years advanced.
He won the Cy Young with 25 and 11.
Say it again.
Eisman won the Cy Young last year with a 25 and 11 stat line.
Good reference there. But in any event, you really just there's no reason I think you would be disappointed. I think is kind of the point you're making. It doesn't necessarily need to work out. I mean, I'm not sure that it will. There have been examples of KHL players kind of coming over. I think Radulov is probably the best example, right? Alex Radulov, he played with I think the Canadians and the Stars for a little bit, and he had a couple of good years with those teams. But more often than not, I kind of think of guys like Jan Kovar, Max Siplikov, who've come over and they haven't really produced at a high level like they were producing in the KHL. So I view it as a take it or leave it kind of situation. It's not going to make or break this team. This team is probably not going to compete for the Cup next year anyway. I'd be very surprised if they even make the playoffs next year.
And it also puts the organization of coaches in a tough spot. I don't know if you remember when Vegas first joined the league, they signed that Russian, I think his name was like Shipashov or something.
Yeah. And
they just wanted to send him to their AHL team for like 2 weeks.
Right.
So he could learn to play on North American ice, and he just bolted home.
Right.
They don't have time for the AHL. Same thing happened with our blue chip guy that finally came over after 10 years.
Yeah.
Yep. We waited like 10 years for this guy to come over, and he gave Bridgeport, Connecticut like 2 weeks. He was like, I'm out of here. I'm heading home.
Yeah.
So that's something they always have in their back pockets. Like, if you don't play me in the NHL, I'm just going to go home.
It's a tough situation. It's a tough situation. Not really much else to say other than I think that it's a rough spot for a lot of these coaches, and that they're kind of coming in with the expectation they're going to make the NHL team. But to be honest with you, there's a reason they're not drafted to the NHL in the first place. There's a reason.
And there's also an adjustment period playing Russia to
But
NHL.
there's a reason they're in Russia to start with. There's a reason they're not already in the NHL, and it's because they weren't drafted to an NHL team. I mean, Kirill Petrov was, but he didn't come over. And for what it's worth, when he came over, he didn't look that good. And he hasn't performed like super well in Russia since. So, honestly, I view this as maybe the guy puts up 40, 45 points. Best case scenario, I think he puts up 50 points. That would be phenomenal. But I wouldn't count on it. And honestly, I think it could be interesting, but we'd have to see kind of how that plays out. But I think that generally, first line, maybe you put him on the second line this year. He plays, and then that's another interesting topic, and I think we'll cover that. There was an interesting article out that was discussing potentially Barzal playing alongside Horvat, or Barzal being the 2C this year. I'm kind of curious, and then we'll kind of transition and close up after that. What do you think about Barzal in the 2C position as opposed to the 1R?
I think it's more of an indictment on Horvat, who is, when with Barzal, he lives up to the contract, produces, puts up good numbers. But when away from Barzal in his brief tenure here, he hasn't been that good. I don't know if there's a fit to play on his line. Like, if you put Anders Lee up there, it's a pretty slow line. I don't know. Ideally, Callum Ritchie becomes a second-line center, maybe. But if you trade Pageau, then you really don't have that buffer. I mean, you go Horvat, Ritchie, Cizikas, Gatcomb. Is that your center depth? That's pretty terrible / weak.
But honestly, I don't think Ritchie projects that well at the NHL level. I look at Ritchie as a Josh Bailey type player. I mean, listen, I love Josh Bailey, but if you're looking at the stats that Ritchie's putting up, he's only scoring something like 20 goals. I think he had 70 points this year or something like that. How many points did the guy have? Right? Like, I don't think that Cal Ritchie is going to be the answer at 2C in the long term. I think Cal Ritchie projects to a much more of a Franz Nielsen-esque 3C, maybe potentially gets to be a 2C. But there's a reason that Cal Ritchie was ultimately traded to the New York Islanders, and that's just because I think you're seeing a situation here where Cal Ritchie, what do you have? He had 7 games up in Colorado. He had 1 goal. It's not that that's horrible, but it's not like, he didn't earn a spot. He wasn't continuing there. Yeah, he had 70 points, right? 70 points this year over in Oshawa. 1 goal in Colorado. This is a guy that if you go ahead, and granted he played 20 less games in the full season, but this is a guy who, if you go ahead and you look at Josh Bailey's stats, I'm quite confident that Josh Bailey is putting up relatively similar numbers to Cal Ritchie in the OHL playing. He was playing for the London Spitfires, but I don't view this guy. I'm not sure I necessarily view this guy as a long-term 2C. What do you think?
So then, if that's the case, then you would hope to have Barzal, Horvat, Ritchie down the middle.
Yeah.
If you don't think Ritchie's a 2C long term, there is no answer for 2C. And unless you draft Higgins, there's not really one in the system either.
Yeah, and I think that's accurate. And just kind of scrolling here, I mean, you could see Oshwood Generals in his draft +2. He put up 70 points. I mean, Josh Bailey never played in a draft +2, but if you look at his I guess his draft year, because I think he came straight up to the Islanders afterwards with the Windsor Spitfires, he's putting up roughly the same numbers. If you adjust for the fact that Josh Bailey played an additional 20 games. And so that's a bit of an indictment on Cal Ritchie. And I'm not sure that – and you look at his numbers too, like he's putting up, 28 goals, 15 goals. This is not like a guy that's putting up 50 goals every single year in the OHL who's just lighting it up every single night. This is a guy who's playing a fine brand of hockey, but I'm not sure he ever gets to a solid 2C position. So it actually does bring up the question, as you were talking, and we're talking about where does Barzal go. I don't think it's realistic for Cal Ritchie to play 2C next year. I think Cal Ritchie likely fits in at 3C, depending on whether JG Pageau plays or not. It's possible if JG Pageau is here, he might, and I think that's ultimately kind of where this conversation goes. If JG Pageau is here, then I think what happens is JG Pageau plays the 2C and Cal Ritchie plays 3C. But if JG Pageau is not here, I think Barzal might swap down to 2C, and I think Cal Ritchie likely plays on 3C. It leaves Danny Nelson down in Bridgeport, but that's kind of what the roster shapes out to be, I think.
Yeah, that'll be a discussion for our new coaching staff. I don't know if you saw, but the Islanders did the impossible.
What did they do?
They hired an assistant coach that ran a worse penalty kill than them last time.
Bob
The Islanders finished 31st in the NHL in penalty kill percentage.
Yep.
And the only team worse than them, I believe, was Detroit.
Yep, Detroit. That's right.
And the person in charge of Detroit's penalty kill, until he was fired alongside Derek Lalonde, was Bob Boughner.
Bob Boughner. Oh, my God. Well, what do you make of that? I mean, this is not something I pay much attention to be completely honest with you. I view the assistant coaching carousel as kind of just being a wheel that never stops. I can remember when Greg Cronin was the assistant coach of the New York Islanders.
I agree, and you don't have to look that much further back. You see Lane Lambert, who is considered an elite assistant coach under Barry Trotz, gets the Islanders head coaching job, looks lost.
Yeah.
Then he goes back with Toronto this year and has, from all accounts, another tremendous performance as their assistant coach. And then he's getting another crack at an NHL job. Bob Boughner, to his credit, has had 2 separate NHL coaching stints as a head coach. One of them was with Florida from 2017 to 2019. He went 80, 62, and 22. Not bad. Missed the playoffs both years, but right on the bubble. And then, unfortunately for him, he was in charge of the Sharks right around the COVID time where their franchise fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
So, not really fair to him there.
But
you also look at, what makes a good assistant coach. And when Matt Martin was getting his flowers and handshakes from the Washington Capitals, I looked over and on the Capitals bench, there was a guy that was really emotional about Matt Martin. Who the hell is that?
Who was it?
Scott Allen, the assistant. It was Scott Allen, the assistant coach from the Scott Gordon era.
He's
still employed.
Unbelievable. Yeah, that is actually amazing.
Working with the best team in the NHL in the Eastern Conference 20 years later.
It's so funny that Scott Allen, because you think back to those, that was a time I really cared a lot about the assistant coaching staff with Greg Cronin, Scott Allen, as he put it, back in the day. Yeah, of course. And wow, I do actually think that's quite funny. And for what it's worth, by the way, we're looking at the display here and seeing, Boughner. What is he? It's funny because you read the Islanders' press release on it. He's previously spent 3 seasons as head coach of the San Jose Sharks, where he compiled a 67, 85, and 23 record. And then he worked his 2 seasons as head coach of the Florida Panthers, and he underperformed with an 80, 62, 22 mark. I mean, you think about those Panthers teams. It's not like those Panthers teams were slouches. That was 2017 is the year after I think they made the playoffs with That was the year they made a year after they lost to us in the first round. I think they won the division that year, right? They did win the division that year in 2016. So it's not like they're coming off good seasons, and honestly, 80, 62, and 22. That's by my math, that's a losing record. So honestly, not sure. I guess we'll just reserve judgment on it. I'm not. I could go either way. Is kind of what I'll say.
And this Ray Bennett guy has literally not taken a year off since 1999.
Yeah.
He was the assistant coach with the Kings from 99 to 06, the Blues from 07 to 2017, and the Avs from 2017 to 2025. He won the Cup, obviously, with Colorado a couple of years ago. He was in charge of their power play, which finished 8th in the league. But when your power play features Nathan McKinnon, Cale Makar, and Mikko Rantanen, it's hard to take credit
honestly,
for it.
The Colorado Avalanche have not had such a great power play the past couple of years. I think they were pretty middling this year, so maybe. I mean, but you're right. That power play with Nathan McKinnon, I think it was Nazem Kadri actually that year too, right? It was Kadri, Landeskog, McKinnon, Rantanen, and then Makar, I think was what the power play was. So
it's hard as an assistant coach to take credit for that.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't take. I don't know if I can necessarily give him any credit for that. Anyway,
but he also like Jim Hiller, who Islander fans hated when he ran our power play.
Yeah.
Is now a head coach in the NHL. So who the hell knows, man?
It's a carousel, and I don't know that it's necessarily fair to give credit or take away credit from any of these guys. Really good episode today. We covered a lot. Just to recap real quick, we started Ryan Bowness, talked JG Pageau, Pierre Engvall, both linked to rumors by Dave Pagnotta. Talked a little bit Matt Barzal in the lineup, talked Cal Ritchie, and then Boughner and Bennett. We covered a lot of ground. I think let's end it on final thoughts before this draft. I think we'll probably do an episode before the draft just to kind of give our rankings. Might be a good exercise to kind of talk about where we see these players falling, where we might assign value to them. I'm sure Pete will have Hagen's high. I probably will as well. But it might be a good idea to kind of do a top 10 on that. But, final thoughts before we head into that episode. Maybe a bit of a sneak peek, bit of a preview before we do that episode. Where do you think the Islanders ultimately go at 1? And we'll end on that.
It feels like the tea leaves are saying Schaefer at this point, unfortunately. I mean, I still hope that they could trade up to 3 or 4 and get both of them. I think that's more likely than them drafting Hagens at 1 at this point.
Yeah.
But, I mean, Darche, it seems like he's active. It seems like the Islanders are linked to players, linked to rumors.
Nick Ehlers would be
I'm sure he wants to
to
put his imprint on this team somehow.
I'm sure too. And I think that I'll leave with this. The Islanders are not a marquee destination in free agency. They're just not. And I don't want to hear, my dad says this to me all the time. Oh, it's a great place to raise a family, Long Island. They have great beaches, great golf clubs. You're an hour from the city. Okay, that's fine. Right? Like, I don't disagree. It's absolutely true. But here's the facts, the actual facts.
Taxes alone make it unattractive.
Well, we don't need to talk about that, but you're not necessarily wrong. That is an issue, by the way, that's going to come up in the CBA. Well, maybe we'll do a CBA episode at some point. Big issue that's going to come up in the CBA. State income tax with respect to Florida, sneak peek. But really, I look at the history of the New York Islanders. They have not signed a big free agent. Was it Miroslav Shatan was the last time they signed a big free agent? Who was even the last big free agent the New York Islanders signed? I mean, Mikhail Grabovski and Nikolai Kulemin don't count. Yaroslav Halak doesn't count. These aren't big marquee free agent players. Like, I can't think of the last time the Islanders signed a free agent that was like a big one. So I'm looking at like Mitch Marner. Oh yeah, it'd be great to go after Mitch Marner. Isles Twitter. Yeah, thanks. The guy's gonna get $14 million. Not that we can't pay it, but we'd have to move cap out. But he's not choosing New York just because he's friends with Matt Martin. That's just not going to happen. It's never happened. Nick Ehlers is an interesting person who could be more of a Miroslav Shatan kind of signing, but it's going to require an overpayment. But I'll say this: if there were ever a time where the New York Islanders had a shot at signing a free agent, it would be coming out of the year that they are barely missing the playoffs, and by my count, and I'm a pessimist, we could have made the playoffs with Matt Barzal this year. It would have been maybe 2 points out, but we only missed by what, 8 points. It's not, and we tanked the last couple of games. We weren't trying anymore, right? Like, we could have made the playoffs with Matt Barzal if he was here for the whole season. You take a potential playoffs team, you give them the number 1 pick, and then at the draft, you go get that 4th overall pick. You then got an infusion of youth coming on to a team that was probably a playoff team, right? And there's excitement around the franchise. The Islanders now have the headline: best draft of the, best result of the NHL draft, best young prospect Matt Schaefer, James Hagens, New York Islander. Now you've got youth coming onto a playoff team that's ready to integrate those players. That is the momentum. That is the kind of hype that you need to be able to go out and sign a guy like Nick Ehlers, because he's going to look at the Islanders and say, hey, they're going to pay me a lot of money. They've got cap space to pay me a lot of money, and they've got a lot of excitement around this team. They're a young team. They're an up-and-coming team. They've got James Hagens. They've got Matt Schaefer. They've got Cole Iserman, Cal Ritchie. At that point, I think you're really thinking yourself, like, those are the guys that are going to carry when he's old and frail and he's, in a body bag because he can't play hockey anymore. That's the guy that's going to carry him to a cup. So, I honestly, I think that could be the right conditions. But I'll ask your opinion, then we'll get going. What do you think? Do you think that there's a potential we sign a free agent like that, or no? Am I deluding myself?
I have learned not to get my hopes up in any. I mean, every year it seems like it's Goudreau, rest in peace. It's Kadri, it's Panarin, it's O'Reilly, it's Stone, it's Tavares is signing back. Bro, I just don't do it anymore. I don't know if it's because I'm old.
Yeah,
if I'm a lost cause. I just don't do it anymore.
I hear you. All right, man. Listen, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody. Remember, check us out on YouTube. Like and subscribe. Make sure to catch us for all of our content. We're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff leading up to the draft. That's super exciting for New York Islanders fans. Looking forward to drafting Matt Schaefer, who's been giving a couple of interviews recently as well. Says he wants to be a New York Islander. Super looking forward to it. I think he kind of reads the tea leaves just like Pete's reading those tea leaves. Thanks a lot, guys, and catch us next time. Take care.